Welcome, Hotshots, to Flashlight by Firepower X. Here you can find the industrial strength tools you need to dominate your personal and professional wellness as a firefighter. My name is Jess. I'm the creator of Firepower X, former firefighter, and your host for today's webinar. And I am really excited to introduce our special guest today, Mr. James Barnum. Jim has worked as an EMT paramedic for over 20 years here in Colorado, and the last 6 of which he's spent with the Aurora Fire Department. Most recently, he became interested in helping people plan their retirement and finances. And so now, off duty, he serves as a financial advisor at Bright Road Wealth Management. Welcome, Jim. I'm so glad to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I kind of want to prep our viewers with these two sides of you, right? Kind of like first responder by day, financial planner by night. So kind of unwrap your first responder side a little bit more for us and your experience.
Sure. I've been working in Colorado as an EMT since 2003. I moved to Colorado from New York. Like a lot of people, you move straight to the mountains, and then after a couple of years of scratching around in the dirt, you realize you can't make a living up there, and so you either move to the mountains with money, or you get lucky while you're up there. So
Yep.
I moved down to the Front Range and worked first as an EMT and then a paramedic. I spent about 10 years in the Fort Collins area, working in Estes Park in the city of Fort Collins,
Hmm.
and then several years at Flight for Life, and then as
Hmm.
well as Clear Creek County, and
Hmm.
then most recently as a firefighter for the Aurora Fire Department,
Hmm.
as well as a paramedic.
Okay.
Yeah,
You've had a pretty good run. You've seen a lot of what Colorado has to offer so
yeah.
far.
I feel pretty
Um,
lucky to have worked with a lot of great people in a
mhm,
bunch of different departments. Yeah.
mhm. Awesome. Okay, so let's now weave in the side of you that's really financially curious, if you will. And
Sure.
I
Yeah.
did I read online you first started with speculating wine futures? Is that correct?
Before I moved to Colorado, I worked for an Armenian family in New York City
Hmm.
who owned several wine shops, and they would buy wine on futures. So they essentially, when you purchase wine, you kind of test it out of the barrel before it's aged or as it's aging,
Hmm.
and then you kind of say, okay, we'll commit to this to so many cases, to such a large portion of a purchase or something. So I got to see firsthand. My boss at the time was like, "Oh, this wine's going to be a hit. We're going to commit to X amount of cases," and it turned out that was the wine of the year. Now
Hmm.
my taste buds were never that good, but
Hmm.
that always piqued my kind of interest in terms of the markets and things.
Hmm.
Fast forward to within the last 3 to 4 years, I had always been interested in investing from my personal side,
Hmm.
having rental properties and things. But I went to Alaska to go climbing for about a month.
Hmm.
And while I was up there in the gates of the Arctic, which to be honest, I didn't even know was a national park till the members of the climbing team kind of told me that it was. If you ever look for it on the map, it's way up in northern Alaska. It's beautiful. It's only accessible by plane or to walk in.
Hmm.
Um, so after spending about a month on the ground with one of the founders of Bright Road, they kind of said, "Well, you'd be perfect as a financial advisor. We're exactly what we're looking for." And I was like, me? Like, are you talking about me? Like, what?
Hmm.
That's not what I do. Like I'm a paramedic and a firefighter. I've done it for so long.
Hmm.
And then I kind of rotated back to Colorado and some personal things. And I was like, well, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can help people with their retirements. And if I feel like there's a need for it. So they
Hmm.
were kind enough to put me on. At first there's kind of like an onboarding process over several years where kind of apprenticeship of like, okay, this is just start entering data. And I did that on my days off. And then, okay, here's some basic planning things to do that. And
Hmm.
okay, get your Series 65, which I went and did. And then kind of the next step portion of that is to get your CFP, which is your Certified Financial Planner.
Hmm.
And that took me about 2 years. So there's in that testing process, there's like seven little mini national registry tests for those of
Hmm.
you who are EMT or paramedic certified. And then at the end, there's a very large test. And I was at the testing center for 8 hours.
Wow.
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. And it was one of the more nerve-wracking things I've ever done, to be honest with
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
Um, and I passed, and so I'm just waiting now. Like you have to work so many hours under another CFP, and that's
Hmm.
where I'm at. I'm in my last 200 hours of working with at Bright Road
Hmm.
to obtain the marks, and I hope to ultimately transition into doing this full time. I'll
Hmm.
be as you stated, I've crossed kind of that 20-year threshold of doing 911 and emergency services, and the mind wanders. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
what else could I do? What else could my life look like? And
Hmm.
I think that very much there's definitely some ego there. Like, well, how can the world possibly get along if I don't go to work, right? And the answer to that is they're going to get along just fine.
Hmm.
They were running 911 calls before you got there, and they're gonna be running calls after you're gone too.
Hmm.
And that's kind of dovetails into retirement planning for firefighters because so much of their identity and who they are is wrapped up in the job.
Hmm.
And eventually, the road of life turns to dirt, and you have to plan for it. You have to
Hmm.
plan for it. So that's where I'm at now. Is just trying to help people on my days off. Um, take a better grasp of the future.
Hmm. And what do these two worlds have in common? What are you what skills are you taking from the fire service into financial planning?
I think, well, they both have in common the ability to be directly honest with people and to help people in that moment. So,
Hmm.
there's if someone is in true extremist, in my opinion, there's no sense in sugarcoating things, right?
Hmm.
I think there's a lot to be said for blunt honesty, in 911 work, and I think the same is said in financial planning. The only difference, I think, is that in financial planning, people hold the ability to walk away. So I
Hmm.
do a lot of consulting with people, and obviously it's all done in private, but
Hmm.
I'm very honest with people about is your expectations of retirement lining up with the reality of the life that you're leading?
Hmm.
And if those things don't align, you're gonna have a bad time.
Hmm.
And some people get it and they're like, okay, I want to make the changes. I want to take some steps to redirect things. And to be honest, some people I never hear from them again.
Hmm.
So
Well, I really appreciate that you don't sugarcoat. Is that pretty standard in the financial world, or are you kind of setting that bar high, having come from
well,
emergency services?
it's not in my nature to sugarcoat. It's
Yeah.
just not them. I can give you my wife's phone number and she can tell you all about how in certain situations I probably lacked, some tact in those situations.
Hmm.
But, I think it is a helpful skill when work needs to get done.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think that I would am your typical financial advisor in that it's all about like the flowery and the projections and your visions.
Hmm.
I want you to have all the nice things and I want you to live the life that you've imagined.
Hmm.
But if you're not going to do the work or you're not in the position to do that, I'm not going to lie to you to get your business
Yeah.
because it's not part of my nature. No.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, that's
Mm.
what you need for habit change. And especially, so what is the temperature check on financial wellness in the fire service? Like where are most people at realistically right now from what you've seen?
Well, I think that, you have probably a small group of people that are very much into retiring and saving and understanding the value of the dollar. And then
Hmm.
you probably have the large swath of people that are going to be okay just because the pension exists and they
Hmm.
don't look at things, but they understand that they need to save, but they're probably not maximizing their retirement without doing some focus on it.
Hmm.
But typically, firefighters have access to a pretty good pension, which is a huge lifesaver for
Hmm.
firefighters in general. Not all firefighters, but typically in the metro area, a lot of the full-time fire departments have excellent pensions.
Hmm.
And then you have, I would say, probably 25%, and this is just my anecdotal experience, that are living way beyond their means.
Hmm.
They get that first check that has a comma in it, right? And then they live right up, they elevate their lifestyles. They get an $80,000 pickup truck that they're not picking anything up with. They
Hmm.
grow a mustache, they get the tattoo sleeve, and
Hmm.
then the next thing that come along is an ex-wife.
Yeah.
So I try to, talk to them before that if they want to talk to me,
Hmm.
and try to head that pathway off, or at least pull some money aside. It's very hard to convince a 28-year-old guy who's making a good living that one day that 48 comes up real fast.
Hmm.
And and that's probably the biggest challenge I see with 25 to 30% of the people that probably need to do some financial planning.
Hmm. Now, do you help more than just first responders, right, with their finances, right? You kind of serve the entire public, or do you like to specialize in
No,
folks like
absolutely.
us?
I have I'd say it's about 50-50.
Hmm.
I have 50% of my clients are probably first responders, and the other 50% are probably like satellite industry. So they're nurses, they're in the healthcare, right? They're doing something kind of on the outskirts of that. And then probably
Hmm.
like 10 to 15% of my clients are just by word of mouth that are not involved in any of the industries, but we just get along. You're in your search for a financial advisor, it's very important that you get along with that individual, right? You don't have to be buddy buddy with them, but you have to have a mutual understanding, and there
Hmm.
has to be some trust developed.
Hmm.
Some people, I'm able to install some trust in them, and that works for them. Other people's like, I don't think this is the relationship for me, and they go and find someone that they, for lack of a better word, vibe with,
Hmm.
and that's fine. That's totally fine. A lot of people, my standard is, I'm like, with where they're at in life and the things that they're looking at, I'm like, you don't have to talk to me, but you should talk to someone.
Hmm.
Find someone that you trust, that you feel safe sharing your life's details with. And remember that you're in charge. You get to ask all the questions. And if the financial advisor is evasive or not clear, find somebody that is. You are
Hmm.
still the client, you are still the customer.
Hmm. And is this something that we really need a lot of hand holding to do, is to really get our finances in order, or can we self-study? Like, what's the learning curve on really bringing yourself into full financial wellness?
Well, I think it really is personal dependent, right? So if you were to equate it to kind of getting in shape, you have people that are self-starters that will go to the gym and try different workouts and read about it and maybe seek out some advice, but they're still kind of on their own. And then you have people that hire personal trainers, right?
Hmm.
Because they don't want to do all that work. They want a shortcut.
Yeah.
Financial planning is a lot of the same way. It's like, how much do you want to read up about financial planning on your own and planning your own retirement? I mean, you have this wonderful device in your pocket that has access to all the world's knowledge. Do you want to spend time doing it? And some people do. Some people want to take a large hand in their retirement planning. I have clients that just want us to do a plan and
Hmm.
kind of give them the guardrails of what we're thinking, and then they want to
Hmm.
go and act it on their own, and that's fine. And
Hmm.
then I have other clients that don't know how to log into their accounts and
Hmm.
just text me and want it taken care of. And that's fine too. It's
Hmm.
really, how do you want to spend your time? What's important to you? And there's always the argument that, like, well, I can save money doing it myself.
Hmm.
Well, that applies to everything. Do you want to change your own oil? Right? Do you want to do your own roofing work?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to paint your own house? If the answer is yes, then you're going to save money. And financial planning is the same thing. So I would take a look at it from a standpoint, is like, do I want to do this? Do I want to do this planning and invest the time? How important is this on the
Hmm.
scale of my life? And I would rank it pretty high
Hmm.
on the importance scale. And am I really interested in it? Some of this stuff is rather tedious,
Hmm.
and people don't want to read, their insurance policy. You
Hmm.
know, people don't want to talk about, the portfolio design, and they
Yeah.
just want someone to tell them what to do.
Hmm.
You know?
And when it comes to financial planning, like what are we really talking about? What are the main like areas that we have to be managing? So like retirement, taxes, like what do you consider just the main points that need to be managed in your financial plan?
Sure. So I think there's you can start with like kind of like the everyday life, right? So
Hmm.
how are we living every day? What is a portion of the work that we're doing today dedicated to retirement funding, right?
Hmm.
And then that day-to-day financing, like, are we safeguarded against the bumps and bruises of life?
Hmm.
So that would be talking about emergency savings, access to emergency funds, and then, obviously insurance.
Hmm.
Now, in America, insurance has become something more of there's investment products with insurance, and there's all the insurance world as a whole. It's a whole different paradigm.
Hmm.
But I people get this sense, well, I'm buying something I may never use. And I'm like, well, that's right, right? We don't buy insurance to win, we buy insurance not to lose.
Mm.
And that's kind of the day-to-day planning that we would talk about. The next portion of that is what are your investments doing, right? What are they invested in?
Hmm.
How are they doing? And what accounts are they in, right, in relation to each other? So kind of structuring your funds to money you'll need in the next 5 to 10 years, money
Hmm.
that's needed in the next 10 to 20, and then money that's further out, right?
Hmm.
And then risk can go up as money's needed later in life, which is probably a little bit more advanced in terms of planning.
Hmm.
And then within all of that is estate planning, which is something that not everyone thinks about, especially when they're 28 years old, right? When you're 28 and you've got a check with a comma in it, you're going to live forever, and
Hmm.
there's nothing's going to get in your way.
Hmm.
So with estate planning, we want to consider things of like wills.
Hmm.
Is there a need to have like a medical power of attorney in place if something were to happen with me? A
Hmm.
DNR in place,
Hmm.
right? Is there a need to have a durable power of attorney to someone to take care of my finances?
Hmm.
Do all of my accounts have the listed beneficiary? Are they going to go to the person that I want them to go to if and when something were to happen to me? I
Hmm.
meet with several people, and they never put their wife on their pension. Just never, or they got married after they got on the fire department. It's something they never updated.
Hmm.
Um, some people, they get divorced and they never change the life insurance policy, or they never change the pension. And if
Hmm.
you die within that window to change, guess who's going to get it?
Hmm.
Right. So those are things that we want to think about in terms of the planning side of or the estate planning, excuse me.
Hmm.
And then kind of the last component of that is, unfortunately, the tax code, right, is something that we need to take into account with how do we save on taxes? What's the best way we can be tax advantaged with our investments? But the tax code's always changing. And so while as CFPs we don't file your taxes, we certainly brush up against the tax world.
Hmm.
And unlike other areas in the world that would be predicated on maybe logic and reason, taxes aren't, right? They
Hmm.
just make stuff up
Yeah.
and they just change the rules arbitrarily on who's ever in power.
Hmm.
So unless you want to keep up on that and how it applies to you directly, then perhaps you should talk to a financial advisor.
Hmm. Great. Wow. Yeah, that's very complex, all of those things. There's a lot involved. And it's a good reminder that when you go through major life changes, like a divorce or a marriage, like you need to be updating these your plan essentially. And I know you and I talked offline, and you mentioned the importance of, dedicating a week to all of this stuff, your finances, your bigger picture financial plan. Do you still agree that that is about how much time we should all be spending per year, or is that if you also have a financial advisor working alongside of you, or what's the context of that 1 week?
Yeah, I would say so. I wouldn't definitely like 1 week out of the year, but it doesn't have to be 1 week, like 7 consecutive days.
Hmm.
So, take a day to get all of your estate planning in place, right? Get the will in place, get
Hmm.
your beneficiaries updated,
Hmm.
get the life insurance changed. Maybe that's one day that you take. And
Hmm.
then maybe take another day to, well, where are all of my accounts? I worked at that job that was 5 years ago. I think I had some money there, or
Hmm.
this job, 10 years ago, there was some money there. A lot of what we see is people are coming into retirement and they never went and got all those old accounts. Well, chances are that if you have 5, 6 accounts out there from old employers, that those investments are likely overlapping,
Hmm.
right? That you're invested in the same thing and your risk has actually gone up because you haven't gathered everything together into one spot.
Hmm.
So that would take one day and be like, if I have any outstanding accounts, let me gather those up. Let me log in. Let me see where they're at, and then see about moving them.
Hmm.
Kind of the other portion of that is I would take a look at my day-to-day finances and be like, can I increase my savings amount, right? Do I need to increase my emergency savings? what is going on with my day-to-day finances? And you would be surprised a lot of times that I sit down with people and talk about their budget. I'm like, okay, other than your mortgage, other than your rent,
Hmm.
how much are you spending every month?
Hmm.
And people have no idea how much money they're spending every month. And we actually sit down and go through the credit card statement and begin to add it up, and several people are shocked. And now I'm not talking bad about those individuals. They're raising
Hmm.
kids, they're working, right? But they're taking just an afternoon to go through what it is you're spending.
Hmm.
Could really make a difference down the line in terms of what it is that you're saving. So you're like, oh, we're still paying for that service? I thought I canceled that, right? A
Hmm.
lot of us don't look at our statements.
Hmm.
The next portion of that I would say is regards to insurance. So you should take a look at your insurance every 2 to 3 years, maybe, but maybe that's one day that's in there. So maybe I should get another you quote in regards to my car insurance or my
Hmm.
homeowner's insurance, right?
Hmm.
How am I fixed for life insurance, right?
Hmm.
And just review those policies. Well, where are they at? Do we have them all gathered into one place?
Hmm.
I I'm a big fan of having everything in one place,
Hmm.
having multiple copies, and having maybe a family member keep all those copies in case something were to happen to your home, and then you having all those copies in a fireproof bag in your house. So
Hmm.
it's all in one place if anything were to happen. Um, those are kind of the things that I would want to review on a yearly basis. Where are all of my accounts? What
Hmm.
does my insurance look like? What is my daily spending versus my daily savings rate? Is that going to be enough? And then, that estate planning portion,
Hmm.
like where in regards to wills and medical power of attorney and all of that stuff. So,
Hmm.
and that I think should take about, we'll make it 7 afternoons for the year,
Hmm.
right? Seven
Okay.
afternoons. And I think that should be enough for the average person to dedicate 7 afternoons to financial planning if they're doing it themselves.
Yeah. Okay. That I think that's totally doable. But how do people's money attitudes work into this? I'm sure you've seen a whole range of how people
Yeah.
conceptualize money and then interact with that representation, right? So what have you seen there, and how can you kind of help the people along who don't have the best money attitudes? The ones who don't pay attention and aren't invested, those 25-year-olds who know they're going to live forever. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's just it. I mean, I think one of the benefits of working with a financial advisor is having that outside objective view, right? So
mhm,
I am not emotionally attached to what you spend your money on, right? I don't. And this is going to sound a bit coarse, but I don't care. Like if you want to buy this or that, or it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that you're saving this much, and
mhm,
that this much is reserved for not the 28-year-old you, but the
mhm,
58-year-old you. That's what matters to me. Everything below that you spend, as long as you're not dropping into debt, it doesn't. I'm not sitting there in judgment.
mhm,
Um, some people, I think, get very defensive when you talk about finances because it is quite a personal thing. They
mhm,
see it as a reflection onto themselves, and quite frankly, it is, right? It's a reflection onto personal responsibility and preparedness and planning. And
mhm,
you know, the trouble with firefighters in this aspect is that they're incredibly hard workers. And if there's a problem, you know what we're going to do? We're going to work harder.
mhm,
And that that solves the problem a lot of the time,
mhm,
but it doesn't solve the problem all of the time. And that's especially true when it comes to financial planning.
mhm,
You can't just be 58 years old on the fire department and find yourself behind the eight ball in terms of retirement and decide, well, I'm going to pick up a bunch of overtime for the next 5 years.
mhm,
You're going to run yourself, into the ground.
mhm,
Um, if you think of, financial planning or retirement in general as sort of this mountain off in the distance, and we're flying towards it, the younger you are, all you have to do is just pull back on the stick a little bit. And by the
mhm,
time you get there, you're going to sail over no problem.
mhm,
But the closer you are to that mountain, the harder it is to pull back on that stick to not run into it, right? But
mhm,
firefighters think, I'm just going to wrench back on this. I got all the strength in the world. I'm going to do it.
mhm,
And pretty soon, the airplane stress or we break the stick off or, like they run into a health problem. And it's hard to convince people who have worked hard their whole lives that working harder is not the answer.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. So what is one for those people who have kind of put things off? And admittedly, in full transparency, I am one of those people who I'm just like, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just going to
yeah,
ignore it. And one day I'll
sure.
be a millionaire. These are my fingers crossed, like,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
for the folks like me who maybe have been neglecting it and suddenly we're in our mid 40s, like, what is a good place to start? What's like something that is not that scary and something that's manageable where we can start taking more responsibility for this?
Sure. Well, I think that the first place to start is if you don't have a household budget, is to form one,
Hmm.
right? If you're just paying bills and the money comes in and the money goes out, that the first place to start is to get a handle on, well, where is the money going,
Hmm.
right? And who's it going to?
Hmm.
The next portion of that is like, well, what do I have saved up until this point?
Hmm.
Where are all those accounts? What do I have in savings?
Hmm.
Um, and then I would say, of course, and I'm a bit biased, is find someone to talk to. Find a financial advisor to
Hmm.
take an outside look at your situation and be openly honest with you.
Hmm.
The longer you ignore it, the worse it's probably going to get, right?
Hmm.
And if you're
Yeah.
admittedly saying like, I haven't really looked at this, it's okay, right? I mean, it's perfectly fine when we see people all the time that have not made the best choices in life. We don't come from a place of judgment. We come from a place of how do we maximize your situation moving forward. You
Hmm.
want to make a change. I think that's great. Let's decide on those changes together. This is my advice at this point. And if you make those changes, you should essentially, um, have a better outlook. Not 5 days down the road, but 5 months, a
Hmm.
year, 18 months. It's no different than when somebody decides, hey, I want to lose some weight. I think that's great. Let's get healthy, but
Hmm.
you shouldn't expect any big changes next week.
Hmm. Yeah. And yeah, it is sometimes hard, if we have had negative money attitudes to take those first steps. And especially, do you see some generational differences? Like, because I feel like I would consider us to be the same generation, Jim. Our generation, a lot of us took on massive debt in college or are still trying to pay that back. And I feel like more so than boomers who didn't quite, I feel like the path was a little bit clearer and straighter in their finances. What about the people who are kind of just to be able to survive, like living beyond their means already, or have some outstanding, big debts from responsibilities they've taken on? Do you have any reassurance for them that they can kind of get things in order for their retirement and be ready for it?
Yeah, I would think that, if you're wanting to make a change, I think it's absolutely possible. I would not, like I said, the longer you ignore it, the greater the problem is, of course.
Hmm.
But I think that one of the things that with the generational views of money is you're absolutely right. Kind of some of the older generations have had issues, or excuse me, have not had as many issues as younger generations, and some of that is sort of grand planning in terms of the cost of living, right?
Hmm.
Inflation, the devaluation of the dollar, kind of the changing of the economy, the American economy, and in the 50s and 60s, there were tons of manufacturing jobs and people could support an entire family on one income, and that's certainly not the case today.
Hmm.
Um, where I see things changing is that for the longest time, especially in the 80s and 90s, parents felt a lot of pressure to pay for colleges for their kids, right?
Hmm.
To take on that debt. And I see those attitudes, kind of starting to change.
Hmm.
It's like, well, I want to support my children, but I need to take care of me first. And that's the right attitude to have because they give out school loans, they don't give out retirement loans.
Yeah. Hmm.
And something that people don't want to admit, but it's a hard truth. If you fail to plan for retirement,
Hmm.
you are going to be a greater burden on your child later in life than
Hmm.
any school loan's going to be,
Yeah.
right? So that's what I would encourage people who are kind of sandwiched in between where they're at now is like, how do I afford to save for retirement and also send my kids to college? Why? I was
Hmm.
like, you've raised your children, like put yourself first. That's
Hmm.
that's what I would do there.
Hmm. And what do you think? Let's talk about investments a little bit. You see investments as something fun that you do once you've gotten your savings established and your retirement plan in place, or should you always be investing from the start as well?
I think that once you've safeguarded yourself kind of against the bumps and bruises of life, then
Hmm.
you can begin talking about investments. So, kind of the hierarchy of planning would be like, do you have a bunch of debt, right?
Hmm.
Beyond your home and beyond your car, right? Those are kind of two things that you can kind of acceptable debt. Like most people don't have 40, $50,000 to lay out for a car. And of
Hmm.
course, the same goes for a home. Beyond that, if you're carrying a lot of credit card debt, that has to go first
Hmm.
because the majority of credit card interest rate that's out there is going to far exceed any expected returns that investments or any safe returns on investments, right?
Hmm.
Right now, the cryptocurrency craze is out there, and yeah, the returns on some of that stuff is far in advance of what the credit card companies are at. But
Hmm.
good luck picking a winner, right? And it's so volatile. I would, that's not something that I would recommend for anyone. So
Hmm.
I would start from plan as, okay, I need to get rid of my debt, and then I need to secure my lifestyle. So that's the emergency savings,
Hmm.
right? That's having my insurance products in place, making sure my family's going to get taken care of, and then looking at kind of the investment side.
Hmm.
Investments are, in full disclosure, like we have an entire trading team that does our investments.
Hmm.
I'm not on the team.
Hmm.
I I don't want to be on the team. I want to be working with people kind of in their expectations.
Hmm.
That that is a whole nother world, right? That is a specialty into itself.
Hmm.
I think with the advent of social media and cell phones,
Hmm.
people have their phones now, and they got their DraftKings app right next to their Robinhood app, and they think it's the same thing, and it's not.
Hmm.
I've sat on the floors, of these big investment houses, and you can't replicate what they're doing.
Hmm.
You haven't gone to school for it. You don't have the certifications. You're better off giving them your money and
Hmm.
allowing them to make the investments for
Hmm.
you. Where people get themselves into trouble is, two things I would look at would be kind of the expense ratios of what something that you're investing in, and
Hmm.
then the turnover of those funds, because
Hmm.
that can eat up a lot of your return.
Hmm.
But I don't investing can be fun if you have if you have money above that planned retirement, right? So we've gone out of the dirt.
Yeah.
We're done taking care of our debt. We've taken care of our daily life. We've
Hmm.
secured our retirement, and now we have extra money. And I want to buy this stock because
Hmm.
I believe in what this company's doing. I
Hmm.
don't have any problem with that as long as these other pieces are in place.
Yeah.
You believe in X company, that's great. You want to buy into the gym down the road or the pizza parlor, I think that's when investing can be fun. But
Hmm.
investing is fun because the money can be lost without affecting the rest of your life. When
Hmm.
investing is stressful, is when you need that investment to pay off,
Hmm.
right? And that's what we want to avoid with the everyday kind of layperson. Yeah.
Hmm. And do you think it's a smart move for, as firefighters, we have really interesting schedules. We have some extra time on our hands, especially for the younger folks who maybe don't have a family or chose not to have kids. I see a lot of firefighters starting side businesses, in their on their off days. Do you think that's a wise decision to kind of be financially diverse in that way, to have multiple income streams? Or is that a risk? Is that a liability?
Well, I'm case in point. That's exactly what I'm doing, right? So I
Yeah.
I kind of have to argue for it at this point.
I was gonna
Um,
say I know your answer will be biased, and that's fine.
yeah, no, it's 100% biased. I think it is really left up to the individual, right? And what they're, I know firefighters that on their days off, they have four kids, and having a side job is just not a reality.
Yeah.
Um, I know the younger firefighters that are, trying to maybe accelerate, their lifestyle, or they want certain things, they're working side jobs. And I think that's fine too. It's really is dependent upon, the individual and what it is that they want out of life.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really kind of the overarching theme of everything, right? If you want to get out of the fire department and you want to live in a van and you want to drive across the country, well, that's very different than like, I want to live in the Caribbean on a yacht. and then take my helicopter over to my other yacht, right? That's a very different lifestyle um, than just living out of a van. So
Hmm.
I think that also anytime, like if you were to start a business or have an extra job outside of the fire department, I personally think it's great from in terms of personal development
Hmm.
and maybe a spiritual development side because of the nature of the work, because of the things that we see. If you're doing something that's totally not involved with emergency services, you're
Hmm.
following some sort of passion that puts money in your pocket. I think there's an intangible sort of benefit there that I can't put in a spreadsheet. So
Hmm.
I'm all for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have only now, after having been out of the fire service for a little while, realized the value of the alter ego, of just really developing yourself in a different way. And yeah, the relief it gives you emotionally from when you do have those bad calls and bad days in the fire service. Um, so I guess as we kind of start to consolidate this conversation, what are some things maybe we haven't talked about that you think are really important for firefighters to hear around retirement or financial wellness?
Hmm. So, well, one, if you're going to say make the decision, okay, I'm gonna talk to a financial advisor. Where do I begin?
Hmm.
Kind of the first thing I would look for is like, is this financial advisor a fiduciary?
Hmm.
In the financial world, there's kind of two standards. There's the fiduciary standard and the suitability standard.
Hmm.
And I always use the kind of the analogies of a used car dealership. And I don't think my boss likes those analogies, but I think they work.
Uh,
Um, so the kind of the suitability standard is you walk onto the car lot and it's like, oh, you need a car, here's a car. And that's the whole conversation. Whereas the fiduciary standard, and it's a legal standard that we're held to, it's like, okay, well, what kind of car are you looking for?
hmm.
Where do you plan on driving? How many people are going to be in the car? What can you afford? Right? There's all those little questions that go along with it to make sure that this is exactly what fits your life.
Hmm.
Something else that I would look for if you're looking for financial advisors, I would look for someone who is truly independent.
Hmm.
All of this, of course, is going to be biased to who I am, but
Hmm.
I'll make the case for it.
Okay.
So if you walk into, a Raymond James or an Edward Jones, you should expect nothing but Edward Jones products. I'm not talking bad about those individuals. That's just the nature of their work. No different than if you were to walk on to a Toyota lot, you should expect nothing but Toyotas.
Hmm.
Where if somebody is operating independently within the financial world, well, they're not beholden to anybody. We don't get any sort of kickbacks by recommending this product or that product, or maybe pushing you in another direction that we can't do, but somebody else can benefit you.
Hmm.
We don't have a financial incentive to move you into products that may not benefit you.
Hmm.
And kind of the last portion of that is a lot like a lot of standards in America. There's kind of like this Orwellian sort of like, well, what does that exactly mean when they say that? And the key phrases are fee only versus fee based, and they
Hmm.
sound very, very similar.
Hmm.
Um, Fee based is what I am. So if someone were to work with me, the only way I would get paid is if they were to move their assets to Bright Road Wealth Management,
Hmm.
or they were to pay for a financial plan, and that's it. I
Hmm.
don't get paid if I say, oh, talk to this mortgage broker, or hey, check out this insurance product, or hey, we're going to utilize these sorts of ETFs or mutual funds. There's no extra money for us, right?
Hmm.
Fee based, there is, right? So
Hmm.
they're going to collect a fee, but they're also potentially going to collect more fees if you use this product or this fund. And there's
Hmm.
entirely too much overlap and conflict of interest with
Hmm.
any of that. So I would look for somebody who's fee only.
Okay.
Um, you know,
So that should be disclosed in the language when they describe themselves, or is that something you have to ask up front as a new customer?
it 100% should be disclosed. Now, I would not be able to quote you the rules like should it be on their letterhead or should it be on the website? It should be somewhere plain to see. And if you don't see it, ask a question. And if you don't like the answer,
Hmm.
ask another question. And if it's still not clear, find somebody else.
Hmm.
Right? That
Yeah.
would be my advice. Yeah.
Hmm. Excellent. Any final parting advice for firefighters to take care of their finances beyond what you've already given us, all these
Sure.
nuggets?
Yeah. Um, Well, one, I would say don't move into your wallet, right? You've worked really hard to get onto that fire department to make, this extra money, and it's well deserved. But
Hmm.
where guys and gals in the fire department run into is they begin to live right up to the hilt.
Hmm.
And I think that's fine for 8 months, right?
Hmm.
Spend a little money, go have some fun, you earned it. But then maybe think about like, okay, what is the long term plan here? Do I want to promote?
Hmm.
Do I want to move? Do I want to have that condo in the mountains? Like, is that the goal?
Hmm.
And begin to think of it in terms of like, okay, I have a finite amount of time to achieve those goals, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so it's a simple equation of like, well, I want to be doing this by this age. How do I get there? And, for some people, it's kind of insurmountable to sit down and plan all that out. And
Hmm.
if it's so, you should take the time to talk to someone like myself.
Hmm. And is there anything in most urban HR departments in the firehouse that can help you with this process? Like, can you go to HR and get assistance with any of these financial things that we talked about today? Because I know some departments do offer just a recommendation of resources, or what have you seen?
No, I think it would be department dependent. I have seen what you're talking about, where if you're with a city fire department versus like a township fire department versus a county government fire department, the resources I think would vary widely. But
Hmm.
if you're in like a major city like Denver, it would not
Hmm.
surprise me at all as part of the city benefits package. It's like, oh, hey, you get 5 visits with a financial advisor.
Yeah.
Different than you get 5 visits with a therapist, or you get a meeting with a lawyer, that's been retained by the city. I think that's if your city offers or your department offers something like that, yeah, 100%. Go in there with your list of questions and your paperwork, and take advantage of that, especially if it's already prepaid. Yeah, why
Hmm.
would that's a great decision. Don't pay me. Go use the guy who's already been paid for,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I do see more departments leaning into at least having a list or somewhere to point their people to start learning about this stuff and just having exploratory conversations. So that's a great starting point too.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I always like to leave our viewers with some tools or resources to build their knowledge base or to take another step forward. What would you recommend that people check out today?
Sure. I think that for those of you who are really kind of interested in the markets and in the history of investing, and that reflects our philosophy, there's a great book out there called A Random Walk Down Wall Street, which kind of
Mhm.
goes through the boom and crash cycles of the American markets, and starts all the way, I think, back in the 1400s. And it's a great read, um, but it talks about how, like, those with patience, those with a steady plan, those who have kind of set their expectations at a reasonable level do quite well year in and year out.
Mhm.
For those of you who just simply have like nowhere, have no idea where to start,
Mhm.
kind of the beginning intro into financial planning. I mean, you could find him anywhere as Dave Ramsey. He's everywhere across the financial spectrum. I disagree with him on some things, as do a lot of financial planners. But if you're looking for just some basic financial advice, that's largely free. I mean,
Mhm.
he's all over YouTube and podcasts and stuff. He would be a great place to start, I
Mhm.
think.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, you mentioned that maybe they could talk to you if anyone wanted to follow up
Certainly.
with you. Is that something that's available?
Yeah, 100%. So all of our introductory meetings are typically about a half hour, and there's no obligation, there's no fee. We
Hmm.
just kind of sit down and see if we are a good fit, if it's
Hmm.
something that we can take that time together to answer any questions that you may have pending, and then get kind of some of the preliminary stuff off the boards, like how does it work, what's the process look like, get some of those maybe the apprehensions and hesitations out of the way, and see
Hmm.
if working with Bright Road is something you'd like to do. And you can easily book with me online.
Hmm.
Um, I have availability going out like 3 months.
Hmm.
Typically, they're done sometimes they're done in person if you're in the Denver area,
Hmm.
but can be done over the telephone or over Zoom call.
Okay, perfect. And we'll put all of the links for those resources in the show notes, and for easy access. Thank you so much, Jim. Any
Of
last
course.
thoughts, any closing thoughts you have to kind of wrap this all up today for us?
Just like anything in life, you have to kind of lean into it a little bit, right? You have to kind of like lean into points, endure a little bit of pain, and I think it'll pay dividends on the other end. So if you
Hmm.
have questions about retirement, if you have questions about, well, what is it going to look like for me? Am I doing okay? Like I always say, you don't necessarily have to talk to me, but you should talk to somebody. You
Hmm.
should talk to somebody.
Yeah. Have you ever talked to anyone and you tell them like you need to go see a therapist? Because I know I've heard that another financial planner has told me that before of like sometimes people's attitudes and approaches to money borders on, like needing
Yeah.
additional professional called in. So has that
I
happened yet?
Well, not quite that, but I could certainly see that. What I see is more you need to maybe talk to a marriage counselor, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times in a marriage, that money is a big topic, especially
Yeah.
if there's not enough of it.
Hmm.
So that's not a conversation that I get in between. I just kind of like this is what you're spending and this is what you can spend, and I'm
Hmm.
gonna let you guys decide, what it is that what the family priorities are at that point.
Hmm.
But it is very much because money is essentially how we react interact with the world, right? We're
Yep.
exchanging our time and our labor and our skills and literally our life for something in order to trade it for the services and goods of other people, right? So it's a direct translation of our self-worth in some sense. So there is a lot of um, emotion tied to it, right? And I
Hmm.
don't fully mean to extract all of that with who I am in this world. That's not my intention.
Yeah.
But I do try to separate, like, look, math is not biased, right?
Yeah.
It's not, this isn't a sort of a judgment onto you. This is not your self-worth as a person. This is just where you're at right now financially. And let's
Hmm.
improve upon that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we don't look at the numbers, we are only left with how we are intrinsically behaving with money. And sometimes, yeah, that's wrapped up in things we're not even realizing. So thank you for
Sure.
that. That was a good
Yeah,
little nugget
100%.
there. And
Yeah. Of
thank you again for coming on the show.
course. Yeah. Of
And thank you
course.
to our community members. If you are still watching, you're amazing. We appreciate you. And as always, my door is open to you if you have any follow up or comments or just want to reach out after this podcast, after this webinar episode. Email me at info@firepowerx.com. And in the meanwhile, thanks again, Jim, and we will catch all of you in the next episode. Bye, guys.